Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022 at 3 o'clock p.m. And that means it is time for Women in Business. Now, I should tell you up front today, I am cruising on very little sleep and a bout of not the best health. So this could be interesting. Let's just put it that way. I'm a little tired and a little fuzzy, so we'll see how this goes. I think it's going to be fine, but just wanted to let you know up front, this may be a little shorter than usual. We'll see how it goes. I always say it's going to be shorter and then I talk for an hour. So what do I know, right? But anyway, what we are talking about today is identity. And the reason that we're talking about this subject, there are a couple of reasons that we're talking about this subject. One of them is I've been thinking a lot lately about my personal identity. And as often happens with this show, when I do a solo show, what I talk about happens to be something that is preoccupying me in my own life in some way. The other reason that we're talking about this subject really comes from what this show was titled, which is Who Do You Think You Are? There is a series, it used to be on the Learning Channel, I believe, and it ran for like 10 or 11 seasons. And then NBC has brought it back and they're now running it on Mondays, I think, called Who Do You Think You Are? And it's celebrities finding out about their genealogy and their families and all this stuff. Now, the whole celebrities finding out about genealogy, the celebrity part is not the part that interests me. It's the watching them learn about their families and seeing how identity is shaped by what happens in your family and what your family tells you about things, and also how patterns get passed down from generation to generation. If there's a pattern of men abandoning the family or mothers abandoning their children or whatever it is, you can see that pattern going through various generations. And that to me is kind of fascinating, maybe because I've done some work in this area in my own life and I can see some of the patterns that have happened in my family and some of the things that were carried down to me. And I also think it's fascinating when people recognize this and they decide to break the chain. They decide to change the pattern. And I always think that's amazing too. And so that's something that's a little fascinating. And all this is wrapped up in identity in a way. So I wanted to talk about identity today. And I have to say, when I started doing research for this show, it's really fascinating and you can fall down a rabbit hole really quick. And for those of you who have not yet seen it, let me see if I can find the proper. If you go to the Women in Business Facebook page, I put up some links from some various articles that I found about identity and what shapes our identity and how to change your identity if you're not happy with the one that you currently have. And there's also an article about the identities that chronic illness can give you, which I thought was really interesting. So if you are interested in any of that, go to the Women in Business Facebook page. If you haven't liked the page, please do, because that's helpful. And hopefully you'll get some information that will be interesting and useful to you. And before we do anything else, I just want to see who's here. Cindy says hello, and she also says, oh no, so sorry you were under the weather. Get better soon. Thank you, Cindy. And as always, comments are welcome, and I love having them, and hopefully we will have a good discussion about this topic. That's what I'm here for. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what forms our identity. Where does our identity come from? I mean, there are people who maintain that you're born who you are, that all the traits that will make you into who you become are kind of there when you're born. I don't know that I agree with that. It kind of feels a little bit like that's too simplistic, that everything, I think personality traits are born into you. I think there are certain things that are part of your genetic makeup somehow, or part of how your brain works, that are you're born with. But I think a lot of your identity comes from interacting with other people and cultural messages and all that sort of thing. And as you grow up, you absorb those things. So one of your main sources of identity is your relationships. I'm so and so's mother, I'm so and so's spouse, I'm his daughter, I'm her niece, whatever it is. I'm friends with these 5 people since I was in kindergarten. Long term, I married my high school sweetheart and we've been married for 43 years. All these relationships form part of your identity. I am an employee of this person. I am this person's secretary. I am this person's second in command, whatever it is. All those things give you some sense of identity, all these relationships. And it can be for good or for bad, depending on what the relationship is like, honestly, and depending on what the people in the relationship tell you about yourself. And we tend to, for a lot of women, especially, the relationships are, I'm so and so's daughter, I'm so and so's niece. They're familial relationships. I'm so and so's mother, I'm so and so's grandmother, whatever it is. And we kind of tend to identify ourselves that way, sometimes more than anything else. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it becomes a bad thing when your own identity kind of gets subsumed into the person that you're married to or the people that you parent, where their accomplishments become a reflection on you, or their tastes and likes and dislikes and needs supersede your own. I think that becomes a problem. Relationships, as we all know, and I've talked about this before, can be nurturing and great, or sometimes they can be toxic and damaging. And either way, that's going to have an impact on how you identify yourself. If you're in a relationship that maybe isn't nurturing and is abusive or toxic, you're going to think about yourself much differently than you will if you're in a relationship with someone who just loves you and thinks you're the most amazing thing that ever existed. That's not rocket science. That's just how life goes. But I think for women especially, the part of this that I really want to examine is how much of our relationship to other people ends up defining who we are. Women, I think, more than men a little bit, tend to define themselves by who they're connected to, or who they know, or who they interact with. And we tend to define ourselves, and this is not surprising, because for centuries, women were defined by, you were so and so's wife, you were so and so's mother. You didn't have an independent existence. You didn't have a legal entity that said that you were your own person. You belonged to whomever you married. So then it kind of makes sense that your identity became, I'm, the king's wife, or I'm the banker's wife, or I'm the, street sweeper's wife, or whatever it is. And your status and your wealth and all those things came from who you were connected to. And I think that's something women need to be aware of, is that culturally, the tendency is to still try to tell us that we need to define ourselves by the relationships that we have. And don't get me wrong, relationships are important, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have part of your identity that you're married to so and so, or you're parenting so and so, or you're, this person's niece, or you're this person's granddaughter, or whatever it is. That can be a source of pride. It can be a source of accomplishment. It can be a source of pleasure. And I think all those things are fine. But I think you also need to have an identity that's independent of everybody else in your life, that's independent of your relationships. Your identity can't begin and end with, I'm so-and-so's wife, or I'm so-and-so's mother, or whatever it is. It has to be with just you. It has to be vested in just you. And I don't say has, or it should be vested in just you. Maybe that's a little better. You need to have a rounded identity, I guess is what I want to say. You've heard the saying, well-rounded people are, more adaptable, and they're more capable of dealing with issues and all that kind of stuff. I think that's true. So you want to make sure that your relationships are not all that define you, that you're not solely caught up in the identity of being somebody's wife or somebody's mother or whatever it is, because that's also very stressful for a relationship. If your whole identity is caught up in the success of your children, or the success of your marriage, or the success of your spouse, or whatever it is, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure to put on a relationship. So you need to be aware of that. And hello, Jeff and Adam. Thank you for being here. And you need to be aware of that, because your relationships are definitely important. Don't get me wrong. But if you're basing your self-worth and your value on the success of your relationships, or the success of the people in your relationships, then you may be sabotaging the relationships themselves, and you don't want to do that. So just be aware of that. So another source of identity is your external characteristics. The one that I always got when I was a kid was, it's really good that you're smart because you're never going to be pretty. And so I grew up thinking for a very long time that I wasn't even going to try to make the most of whatever my appearance was, because I couldn't do it. But damn it, I could be smart. And excuse me, I swore, and I'm trying not to do that anymore. But that was part of my identity, was I wasn't pretty, but I was smart. And that mattered. And your external characteristics can be, I'm in a wheelchair, I'm Black, I'm Asian, I'm Hispanic, whatever it is, Latinx, whatever you want to call it. External characteristics, as the name implies, are things that we can see, basically. And that can be its own burden sometimes. There are parts of your identity that can be burdensome if you are someone who's of a race that is habitually treated less well. If you're someone with a disability that people can see, and so they tend to treat you as though you're not as capable as everyone else, or they tend to assume you're not as smart as everyone else, or whatever it is. So external characteristics can be a double-edged sword. There are also things like your external characteristics can be, you're the most gorgeous person on the planet, which at first glance is like, oh, hey, that's a great thing to peg my identity on. But especially if you're a woman, you get older. And when you get older, culturally, you could still be the most beautiful person on the planet at 20 and then at 50. But at 50, that beauty is going to have less value because you're 50. So external characteristics are something that make up our identity, and I think they're important, but we need to understand the full scale of what we're dealing with when we talk about external characteristics. I mean, you can be proud of being, Black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever it is. And you can also acknowledge that there are challenges that come with that identity. You can be, a fierce advocate for accommodations and for disabled people being able to take their abilities as far as they can, and still admit that the world is not set up for you always, and that people will sometimes treat you in not the best of ways, maybe, not because they're trying to be evil or anything, but just because they either don't know how or they're making assumptions about what's going to help you instead of asking you what's going to help you. So, your identity, again, it's a double edged sword. There can be good things about being a certain ethnicity or about, dealing with a disability or about being really pretty or whatever it is. And there can also be things that aren't great about it. And there can also be things that impact what you think about yourself. I mean, beauty is the obvious one. If you have always been told you're very handsome or you're gorgeous or whatever, that becomes the thing that you lead with, and that becomes the thing that people may tend to take as your main quality. So you can be really beautiful and really smart, but people will notice the beauty first and may assume because you're pretty that you're not very smart. And it's the same thing with any kind of racial characteristics that you have. People may assume that you have, certain beliefs or that you advocate for certain things or you belong to certain groups because you're a Black person or you're an Asian person or whatever it is. And people will also buy into stereotypes easier if you have, if you're Black or Asian or fat or whatever it is. So our external characteristics can become part of our identity in spite of ourselves sometimes. And it's also, there are some external characteristics that will change over time and some that won't. I mean, your race is your race. You're not going to suddenly become white if you were Black or Asian. That's not going to change. But other things like your appearance, if you're fat and you suddenly get thin, if you have an accident and you suddenly have a disability that you didn't before, that can be a huge change for your identity, or just aging. That's why I think aging is such an issue for a lot of women, because if your worth is predicated on being fertile, being able to have children, and being able to attract men or attract a sexual partner, whatever you want to call it, but historically it's been attracting men, then what happens when you get older? What happens when you get gray hair or your chest starts to sag a little more, or you have cellulite, or you put on an extra 10 pounds, or you get wrinkles, or whatever it is? Are you worth any less because of that? Does that make you less of a person? But it changes your identity, because if your identity was always, I'm pretty, then when people start maybe treating you differently or treating you as though you're not, that's a huge shock. So external characteristics are a double-edged sword. They can lead people to believe things about you that maybe aren't true. They also can change. And when they change, so does your identity. So all these things, and I'll give you a stupid example, but it was funny to me today for some reason. So like I said, I'm kind of tired and I'm still not feeling all that great. And I was sitting here before the show, and I get everything ready before the show, and I go over my notes and whatever I want to do, and I just kind of get my head in the right mind space to be able to do this. And I was looking at myself on this screen, and all of a sudden all I could see was my nose. And I was looking at my nose and going, how did my nose get so big? What is the deal with that? Why is my nose so big? Has my nose always been this big and I've just never noticed it? And I had like a 3-minute thing where I was obsessing about my nose. Now, my nose is my nose. It's the same nose I've had my whole life. There is no difference than it ever has been. But for that moment in time, my nose became my identity in a way, because it was yet another conclusion that no, you're not pretty. And for a moment that got in my head. And then I went, well, my identity has never been that anyway. So, so what? My nose is my nose. It does what it's supposed to do. But it's funny how something so silly can get in your head and become a part of your identity. So for the next few days until I get it out, I'm going to be the person with the huge nose in my head. I don't know why. Like I said, my nose is the same as it ever was. There was just something about how it appeared on screen today that got to me. So it's silly little things like that that can get in your head sometimes. And I like this comment from Carolyn. She says, I am a different person every time I learn something new about myself, like tolerance or acceptance that I will never be like I am 23 again. And looking back, ye gods, that girl had no clue. LOL. And yeah, I'm with you on that, Carolyn. I would not want to go back because I like this version of me much better than I did the version of me that was struggling with a lot of these identity issues. And I'm honest, I'm 53 and I'm still figuring out my identity. And a lot of that is because I had to unlearn a lot of things that I learned about what my identity was that weren't true. But external characteristics are something that will stick with you, and you have to make your peace with those, and you have to accept that they're going to be part of your identity. And then the third thing that tends to shape your identity is attitudes and beliefs. I'm a Christian. I'm Jewish. I'm Muslim. I believe that women should all be married. I believe that women should all have children. I believe that people should be able to make the choice of what they want to do with their reproductive systems. Attitudes. I think that smart people are dumb. No, beautiful people are dumb. Smart people are not dumb. See, I told you my brain was going to fire off the wrong way at some point. I think that Americans should love their country above all else. I think that Black people are lesser. I'm not saying these are good beliefs. I'm just saying these are attitudes and beliefs that people have. And that can shape your identity too. And a lot of that we learn from the culture we grow up in. A lot of that we learn from the people we grow up with. And a lot of it we learn in school or from what we read or from the media. You know, there's a number of places that you can pick up these attitudes and beliefs. I mean, I am not, let's say for one thing, I am not religious. I don't particularly subscribe to any organized religion. I don't go to church. I won't say I'm atheist, but I'm probably agnostic. I'm not entirely sure if God exists, and I'm not sure how I feel about the concept of God, if it is really a thing. I try to live a spiritual life. I've done a lot of research into religion, trying to figure out what I believed and what I didn't. I grew up in your standard quasi-religious household. We weren't fanatics about it. We went to church. I was confirmed. I did all the stuff that people do, but it was kind of because that was what people did. And my particular family was very big on fitting in and doing what everybody else did. So everybody else went to church, so we went to church. I don't know that any of us were particularly dedicated to it. It was just something that people in our socioeconomic class in our town did. So we found the church that was the upscale church and we went there. That was how it worked. Did I particularly get anything out of it? Not much. I sang in the choir. I learned all the stuff I was supposed to learn, and I could adequately parrot it back to get confirmed. I don't feel any particular affection for it. It just was something we did. But out of that came a lot of beliefs, honestly, some of them that I'm still working through. So I think it's interesting that you can take on beliefs at one point and then look at them later, or take on attitudes at one point and then learn more later and realize that maybe what you believed or how you were behaving or a particular attitude you had about something wasn't right. And yes, I like this comment from Carolyn. Being a grandma and unfiltered comments from wee ones is pretty enlightening or humbling. And I think that's true. Kids do have a way of questioning, and kids do have a way of looking at things differently because they haven't absorbed all the time the kind of beliefs and attitudes that maybe those around them have. And so I think it's an interesting thing to look at kids sometimes and say, why do I think this and why don't they think that? And who taught me this? And do I want to teach this to my kids or the kids that I interact with, whoever they may be? And it's a question I think more people need to ask, because a lot of us absorb attitudes and beliefs that maybe are negative or maybe aren't, I don't want to say politically correct because that's not what I mean, but maybe aren't kind. And we tend to walk forward with those. And they could be attitudes and beliefs about other people. They could be attitudes and beliefs about ourselves. And what happens is they kind of get encapsulated in stone after a while. And you start thinking, well, this is what I've always believed. And this is, how I've always reacted toward these people. And this is how right-thinking people should react toward this group or this thing. And before you know it, you're ending up with some behaviors or some beliefs or some attitudes that maybe aren't serving you well and maybe aren't kind to other people. And there's the saying, of course, I'm sure you've all heard it, an unexamined life is not worth living. But a lot of people don't examine where their attitudes and beliefs came from. And attitudes and beliefs are a big part of your identity. And they also can dictate a lot of your behavior. So you need to be aware of where these things came from. And even if they serve you well, who taught this to you? Why do you think this? And it's an interesting exercise to do, because sometimes you will realize that an attitude or a belief that you have is really impacting you negatively, but you never thought about it enough to understand why you had it. And if you aren't thinking about it, you can't change it. That's where we're going with that. And it could be anything. I mean, it could be an attitude or belief about money. It could be an attitude or belief about sex. It could be an attitude or belief about physical appearance or exercise or food or whatever it is. But if you don't look at where these beliefs and attitudes came from, then you can't fix them if you need to. And part of building an identity that works for you is figuring out what parts don't work and changing them, which is a little bit what we're going to talk about in a while. But I want to talk about first why people tend to go against what their authentic identity is. And your authentic identity is basically the most you that you can be, the persona that feels the most right for you. Like I have said before several times on this show and in other places, that I think I'm probably the most authentic me I've ever been now. And it's sad that I had to wait till 52, but I had a lot of attitudes and beliefs and things that I needed to work through to get to this place, to be comfortable with this person. And one of the reasons that a lot of people don't do the work or don't take the time to examine their attitudes or beliefs is because they want to fit in. And the drive to fit in, the drive to be part of the group, the drive to feel like you belong is huge. I mean, we all have it. We all want to be part of whatever the prevailing group is. We all want to feel like we belong, like we matter to people. And I like this from Carolyn. Carolyn, you're just killing it with the comments today. Reflection every 6 months or yearly is really helpful. Make a list and see each year how much you have changed or how much your thinking has changed. And I think that's definitely something that you should do, because part of what happens when you're driven to fit in is that you will compromise your authentic self and your beliefs at times to fit in. Because we all want to feel like we belong. We don't want to feel like the weird one. We don't want to feel like the one who doesn't belong, or the one that people look at and say, did you see what she did? Or, did you see what he said? Hear what he said, or this person is so weird, or they're a nerd, or they're a geek, or they're, whatever it is. Pick your pejorative. There are a lot of them. And it starts when you're young. You don't want to be the last one picked for the team. You don't want to be the kid that nobody wants to sit with at lunch. You don't want to be the one that gets bullied or teased. All of those things. And hopefully you find your thing when you're young, something that you can hang your identity on, which could be a sport or drama or music or whatever. When I was young, mine was music. I sang, I played violin and piano, music and drama, and writing. Those were mine. I still got bullied. I still got teased. I still had a pretty uniformly horrible junior high experience, at least. But because I wanted to be one of the group, and I didn't really know how, and I was a little weird, and I liked things the other kids didn't like, and, yada, yada, whatever. And there are two ways you can go with this. And the way that I chose, mostly because I saw most of the people around me choosing it, was try to tamp down the parts of yourself that don't fit and try to ignore them or get rid of them or whatever it is, and just play up the parts that seem acceptable and try to be part of the group. And I'm sorry, but my nose has decided to run a little bit. So the drive to fit in is a huge motivator, and people will go to extremes. I mean, people who are overweight and who want to feel like they're want to become more acceptable will go on extreme diets and extreme exercise regimens to fit in. People who, there's cases of people who participate in hazing or bullying or teasing or whatever you want to call it, because they want to be part of the power group or the power clique. And even though they know it's wrong and they know that it's hurting someone, they'll do it anyway because they want to fit in. And so they'll compromise their beliefs about fair treatment or just treatment or right treatment or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, this is true too. Cindy King says, hey, even being in a group, you can still get bullied. Yes, that's very true. There are groups that will select a member to be the scapegoat. And I'm sorry, but I got to blow my nose here. Who will select a group member to be the scapegoat, who will select someone to be the one that, everybody picks on. Yeah. So fitting in doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get teased or bullied, but at least it gives you a group to be part of. And the urge to belong and the urge to fit in is probably one of the most powerful urges that we have as human beings. And that could be back from caveman days when the people that were part of a group survived and the people that were loners didn't. So it might be in our hindbrain that we all want our group. We all want people around us that we belong to. And if you're one of the people who doesn't fit in, it can be really lonely and it can be really hard. And you can bend yourself into pretzels trying to become the person that you think you need to be to fit into whatever your particular group is. I mean, I don't even want to tell you how many pretzels I twisted myself into when I was younger to try to fit in with my family. Didn't work, but I tried. And you end up betraying yourself almost sometimes because you want so badly to fit in and you want so badly to be acceptable that you're willing to accept treatment and you're willing to accept judgments that you wouldn't otherwise if you weren't trying to make yourself acceptable to people. And it's a sad thing sometimes because it's a powerful drive, and it can be a beneficial drive in some sense because there are teams that it's worth being a part of. But when you start lopping off parts of your personality, or you start discounting things about yourself that are actually really cool, or when you start being inauthentic, then that's something you need to look at. And that's something that you need to consider if fitting in is really worth it. And I'm here to tell you, not fitting in, lonely sometimes. But the value of being true to who you are, huge. So if being true to who I am means that I don't always fit in with everybody, I'm okay with that now. Took me a long time to get here, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that I'm not mainstream and I'm probably never going to be. Okay. I'm good. But that was a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of figuring out who I really was to get to this place. So I'm not sitting here saying that any of this is easy. And I'm not sitting here saying that wherever you are is wrong. I'm just saying, think about this stuff. I'm just saying, if you are unhappy about your relationships, or if you're unhappy with your identity, you can change that. May not be easy, might be a lot of work, but it can be done. And you also need to draw the line in terms of, what are you willing to do to fit in? How much does it matter to you to fit in? What are you willing to give up in order to fit in? Questions, good ones. So let's touch for a minute on being authentic and what that means. Definitions vary, honestly. There are a lot of different versions of what being authentic means. I think the simplest one, is, I like this. Carolyn says, I really value authentic, quirky friends that I have. Makes life interesting. Yes. And Cindy says, I think confidence also plays a role. But even so, it can still be hard. I would agree with you, Cindy. Yes, confidence does play a role. And even if you're confident in yourself, and even if you really like yourself, it can still be hard sometimes to say, this is me. And that's really what being authentic means, is saying, this is me, flaws and all. This is me, warts and all. This is me with the weird, quirky things that a lot of people don't understand. But this is me, authentically me. And how do you know when it's authentic? Because like I've been saying, we get all these accretions of layers of beliefs and shoulds and all this stuff put on top of us. So how do you know when you're authentic? I can tell you what I've read, and I can tell you what it meant for me. When I started getting authentic with myself, it wasn't always comfortable, but it was a relief because I didn't have to parse everything out to figure out how I should act in certain situations. I just was me. And if I liked it, I liked it. And if I didn't like it, I didn't like it. And if it made me happy, I said it made me happy. If it was something I wasn't interested in, I said I wasn't interested. And being authentic is not easy because it's owning all of yourself. It's also owning the parts of you that maybe you're not that proud of. And that's a tough thing to do, to look at all of you and say, okay, I like these 5 things, but I'm not as proud of these 4 things, but they're still part of who I am. And I need to own that, and I need to accept that. And you also need to understand that when you are being authentic, there are people who are not going to like that. There are people who may be close to you who may not like that. There are people who will be threatened by that. There are people who will try to convince you to go back to being inauthentic because that was easier or more comfortable or safer for them. And some people will do it out of really genuine love and the beliefs that they have, that they think you're doing something dangerous or whatever it is. And some people will just, especially if you've always been a person who's been a caretaker or who has never made waves, and all of a sudden you start being more authentic and advocating for yourself, there are people who aren't going to like that. It is what it is, and you have to accept that and be aware of it. And yes, Cindy makes a good point. I cannot imagine today's schools. The peer pressure is worse than when I was in school. Social media for teens is scary. And I have to say, I am eternally grateful that social media was not around when I was a kid, because there's a lot of stuff that I'm really glad is not documented. Let's put it that way. But being authentic is not an easy thing. And I think that's something that we all need to be aware of and we all need to understand. But I will also say there's a freedom that comes with that. Hi, Nikki. Nice to see you. You can grab the replay. Not a big deal. But I think that being authentic is what you need to be. Because honestly, I'm happier in some ways than I ever have been, because I figured out who I am and I'm comfortable with it, mostly, sometimes. I'm a work in progress. We all are. But I think once you stop trying to be who you think other people want you to be, and you look into yourself and you see what you want to do and what matters to you and what you believe and what you want, and you start formulating your identity on those things rather than who you're related to or who you're married to or who you're parenting or what your race is or what your abilities are or whatever that sort of thing is, or what your religion is, or any of that. And that's not to say that all those things can't be part of your identity and probably should be part of your identity, but figure out what they mean to you and what the impact is on you and not what other people have told you. Like I said, it's, the Velveteen Rabbit. Being real is painful at times. Your fur gets rubbed off and your ears fall off and all sorts of rotten things happen, but it means that you were real and you were seen for yourself and you used your talents and your gifts to be the best you could be. And I think in the end, that's a win. So, next question. If you are working on becoming authentic, if you've realized that the identity that you have is not necessarily the identity that you want, if you have pain points in your life that you'd like to fix, all that stuff, how do you start doing that? Okay. First thing, and boy, this was one I had to learn. Wow, a lot. Set boundaries. Boundaries are there to protect you. Boundaries are there to let other people know that they shouldn't trespass. Boundaries are good things. We should all have them. And everybody's boundaries are different. And your job as a human being is not to tell other people their boundaries shouldn't be what they are. Your job is to respect those boundaries. And setting boundaries, not easy, particularly if you have not historically set them. Hard. Because the people that are in your life, and it's a whole nother conversation about whether those people should be in your life, but the people that are in your life may not respect the fact that you're now setting boundaries, either because they're not used to it, either because the boundaries don't get them what they want, either because they are self-absorbed or selfish or whatever it is, and they want you to serve their needs in some way. And sometimes setting boundaries means you have to let go of friendships or, love relationships or family relationships or whatever it is. Sometimes you saying, this is not acceptable to me, or this is not something that I want to happen in my life, means you have to let things and people go. And that's not easy. But the value of it is once you set the boundaries and maintain them, then your life becomes exponentially better because you're getting rid of things that are things and people that may not be treating you well, that may be taking you for granted, that may be hurting you in some way. It's not easy. Setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries is hard. I'm not going to lie to you, but the benefits are huge. And yes, I think this is totally true. Nikki says, the more I am who I am, the more people gravitate towards me. I agree with that. And I think that's totally true. And I've found the same thing. The more that I am authentically me, the more people seem to like that. And the more comfortable I am as well. And yes, no is okay. Totally true. And no is maybe the first boundary you need to set. No, I can't do that. No, that's not okay. No, that's not acceptable. No, I don't want to do this. And everybody's not going to love it. I set a boundary with my father, and he has cabins in the town where he grew up. And we vacationed there when I was a kid, like every summer. And I hated it with a passion. And I've never, within the larger family, Shreve family group, that town in that place is kind of like sacred ground. They love it. They go there every year. There's a Shreve week every year, whatever. And I finally told my dad, and this was fairly recently, I don't like it there. I don't want to come there. Can we do something else? Can we go have dinner somewhere? Can we make other arrangements? Didn't go over well. Didn't think it would. But that was a boundary for me. Why do I keep going to this place that I don't really like, that has basically sad memories for me, to be with people that don't accept my boundaries? Why am I doing that? So, it is what it is. And saying that was really scary, because usually what I do is I'd make an excuse. Oh, I had to be somewhere else. Oh, I had a migraine. Oh, I didn't feel well. Oh, it wasn't, whatever. And instead I just was like, look, I'm just going to lay it out there. I don't like that place. It doesn't have good memories for me. I know it does for you. It doesn't for me. I'd rather do something else. We haven't done something else. We probably won't do something else. But at least I set a boundary and I spoke my truth. And so that's basically what I mean when I say setting boundaries is, what you like, what you fear, what makes you sad, what makes you angry, what you think is poor treatment, what you think is unjust treatment. That's specific to you, and it's not wrong. And people will tell you you shouldn't think that, you shouldn't feel that, you shouldn't want that. Because people do that. Because they have their own agendas, or they have their own feelings, or they aren't taking the time to try to understand you. It is what it is. And setting boundaries isn't easy, but it is necessary. And yeah, okay, Cindy, you're not wrong. Maybe as an adult, you may need to revisit and build new memories from that old childhood. Possible. But honestly, I don't see that happening in the current situation. But yeah, maybe you're not wrong. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. That's a question I'm honestly haven't really ever thought of it that way. It's a good question. So the next thing when you're becoming your authentic self is question the shoulds. I grew up with the shoulds. The shoulds lived in my house like you would not believe. And the shoulds were everything from you should be a certain weight, to you should want to do certain things, to you should never tell anyone what happens in this house, to you shouldn't talk about the fights and you shouldn't talk, there were shoulds and shouldn'ts, and they were pretty strict. And I grew up encapsulating a lot of those in my identity. I should be thin. I should be less geeky. I should be more exuberant and extroverted. I should care more about my appearance. I should want to get married. I should want to have children. I should like the same things my parents like, all that stuff. And it took me a long time to kind of go, okay, why? Why should I do those things? Why is it bad if I talk about what happened in my house when I was growing up? Why is it bad if I talk about things that people don't necessarily talk about on a regular basis? If it's helping people, if I'm maybe helping people learn something they didn't know or understand something they didn't know, is that bad? Why should I be a size 5? Why? I mean, okay, excess weight, there are health reasons. I get that. But appearance-wise, why does it matter if I'm a size 5 or a size 25? I don't know. Why should I wear my hair a certain way? Why should I want to go to these places and not these places? Why should I have loyalty to people who don't have loyalty to me? These are all questions. And we don't question the shoulds a lot. We get told things and we kind of go, that's how we should behave because that's how we were told. And when you're a kid, your parents are the ultimate authority. When you're a kid, adults are the ultimate authority, and they tell you what the world is. And then you're in the world and you learn from how people treat you and things that happen to you, what the world is. And if you're lucky, all your experiences are good ones, but most people have some that aren't so good. And this is totally true. And whoops. And Cindy, you're also right. As an adult now, you have control over the situation. Yeah, and sometimes the control over the situation is, I don't want to go there, so I'm not going to. But you're not wrong. And the only reason to be a size 5 is the thrift stores have more of those sizing clothing selections. This is true. This is true. So there's a lot of shoulds that we all get in our lives. And I should say this. See, I just shoulded myself. Oh, dear. A lot of the people that tell us we should do certain things are doing it from a place of love. They're not trying to hurt us. They're operating on their understanding of the world. And what they understand is that these things are the things you should do to successfully exist in the world as they know it. And that's one thing that I think when you're becoming your authentic self, you need to learn. It's important because a lot of times when people are questioning why they believe what they believe or what their identity is, one of the things that comes out is anger at people who maybe gave you negative messages or told you harmful things or did things that you perceive as things that hurt you or were harmful to you. And one of the best things I think that you can recognize when you're looking at your shoulds and when you're looking at what people taught you is the fact that a lot of what people tell you, even though it may be negative or ultimately harmful to you, they're telling you or they're doing because this is their belief of how the world works. And this is what their experiences taught them. And oftentimes they're trying to save you from experiences that they had. And in so doing, maybe they're making choices for you or telling you things that ultimately are harmful, but they're not doing it to be harmful. They're doing it to try to save you or help you. It's just that ultimately their understanding of the world maybe wasn't correct. And I think that was probably one of the most valuable things that I ever learned, is that, yes, there are things that I can say, there are people in my life who did bad things to me. And there are people in my life who hurt me. This is true. But there are also people in my life who weren't meaning to hurt me, who were trying to actually help me based on their understanding of what the world was. And, you have to make your peace with that. And you have to accept that well-meaning people can do damage, totally inadvertently. So when you're questioning your shoulds, keep that in mind. And finally, check your values. What matters to you? Kindness, intelligence, openness, diversity, achievement, accomplishment, acceptance. What matters to you? What do you value? Because that's part of your authentic self too. And I think if you look at all these things, if you set boundaries, if you question your shoulds, and if you check your values, you'll ultimately come to a more authentic expression of your identity. And identity is complicated. It is not an easy thing. This may be a long process. And you should also keep in mind that your identity changes over time. Who I was at 20 is not who I was at 40, and certainly isn't who I am at 53. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we should change and grow and learn. So this is my little, whatever you want to call it, lecture, diatribe, thoughts on identity. I hope it was interesting. It was interesting to me, honestly. A lot of the research that I did really led me to think about some things that I haven't thought about in a while. And some of the comments here today made me think about some things. So thank you for that. And thank you for watching today. And thank you for being here. And I do appreciate it. And and turn everything you said back on yourself, myself, and see where things changed or where they need to change. Yes. And like I said, I've been thinking about my identity a lot lately, and that's kind of what prompted this. What is serving me well and what is not serving me so well? And what do I need to look at and change? So there's your homework, everybody. Take a minute to look at your identity and figure out what's working for you and what isn't. And if it's not working, change it. Thank you, Carolyn. Carolyn says, good talk today. I appreciate that. All right, everybody. Once again, I said I was going to be short, and it's been an hour, or almost an hour. Thank you, everybody. I will see you next week. As always, not sure if there's a guest yet or if it'll just be me, but hopefully it'll be entertaining either way. And I will let you know as soon as I know. Bye, everybody. See you.